The Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean. Who is Maurice Doreal? In this 5-part video series, we'll explore the personal background and history of the man who wrote and authored the book, The Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean, and learn about what motivated him to interpret and translate the tablets so that the messages contained within could be understood by all. Let's begin by reading the preface. The Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean, Who is Maurice Doreal, is a compilation of online sources that have been collected and gathered into a single, cohesive work for the purpose of establishing a more clear and concise history about the man known as Maurice Doreal. In our exploration of Maurice Doreal's personal history, the objective of this compilation is to better determine whether or not the existence of the Emerald Tablets is valid, whether or not they are real, or whether they are simply the fictional result of the author's imagination. Through the eyes and thinking mind of Maurice Doreal, our focus is to examine what factors may have stimulated his interest in the matter of the occult sciences and the esoteric studies of the arcane. It is through the efforts of this compilation that we are attempting to better understand what motivated Doreal in the pursuit of sacred knowledge and wisdom, that which resulted in his writing and authorship of several books, as well as his acquisition and archival of works that originated in the remote histories of antiquity. In order to dispel the myths, the controversies, and the conspiracies surrounding the Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean, the goal of this compilation is to separate fact from fiction and to learn about who Maurice Doreal was and what it was he sought to accomplish over the course of his lifetime. With that said, let's move on to Part 1. The Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean, a brief history about the author. There has been much speculation regarding the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. When we take into consideration the origin, the history, and the validity of this historical narrative, there are 3 major questions on the minds of many. The first question being, are the Emerald Tablets real? If we are to believe what we can glean from the history of M. Doreal, also known as Maurice Doreal, the author of the book entitled The Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean, then it would appear that groups of obscure, unnamed individuals belonging to the Great White Lodge, the Egyptian priesthood, the Mayan priesthood, in addition to M. Doreal himself, are the only people who could confirm whether or not the tablets are real and that they do indeed exist. This in turn leads us to our second question. Where are the Emerald Tablets located? To date, no one has been able to provide a definitive place or exact location as to where the tablets may be housed. If the Emerald Tablets do indeed exist, number 1, they are not available to the general public for viewing, and number 2, the tablets are not accessible to anyone in such a way that would allow them to confirm the existence of said tablets and to draw their own conclusions about the origin, the nature, and the purpose as to their creation. This in turn leads us to our third question. Who is M. Doreal, also known as Maurice Doreal, and what inspired him to write a book entitled The Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean? We will attempt to answer this question by referring to 2 sources of information regarding the history of M. Doreal. Let's begin with our first source. The title of our source is Maurice Doreal, and our source is wikipedia.com. Maurice Doreal, who lived between 1898 to 1963, was born Claude Doggins. He was an American occultist and founder of the Brotherhood of the White Temple. Doreal claimed that during a 1925 visit to the Great Pyramids of Giza, he discovered a set of ancient emerald tablets belonging to the Egyptian deity Thoth, whom he reimagined as a king of Atlantis. Doreal claimed to have translated the text, which he published as the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean. In around 1930, Maurice Doreal formed the Brotherhood of the White Temple in Denver, Colorado, having been involved in theosophy. He claimed that in 1931, in Los Angeles, he met two Atlanteans who took him to a cave underneath Mount Shasta. Doreal quickly developed a cosmology focused on the inner earth, describing underground races he claimed to have learned about from the Atlanteans. Doreal developed theories of an underground serpent race. During the 1950s, Doreal incorporated aliens into his views. He combined these all into a theory that in the second half of the 20th century, the serpent race would ally with the Antichrist. He believed that there were three types of flying saucers, including one piloted by serpent people who were once icebound in Siberia, became defrosted, and then replaced and overthrew the communist regime in Russia. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, Doreal relocated the Brotherhood near Sedalia, Colorado, where he predicted that nuclear war would happen in 1953, but that he and his community would be protected by the mountains in the valley they relocated to. He died in 1963. So what can we take away from what we just read? Let's do a summary and analysis of our Wikipedia source and review key points about Doreal's personal background and history. So firstly, from our reading, we learned that Claude Dodgins, also known as Maurice Doreal or M. Doreal, lived between 1898 to 1963. He was born in 1898 and died at the age of 65 in 1963. He had an interest in the occult, the esoteric studies of theosophy, and sought to attain the sacred knowledge and wisdom of the arcane. In 1925, Claude Dodgins claimed to have visited the Great Pyramid of Giza, where he discovered a set of ancient emerald tablets belonging to the Egyptian deity Thoth. He also claimed to have translated the tablets, where he reimagined Thoth as a king of Atlantis, and subsequently published a book entitled The Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean. Claude Dodgins used the pseudonym Maurice Doreal as well as the pen name M. Doreal in the writing and authorship of his book entitled The Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean. And finally, in the early 1930s, he founded the Brotherhood of the White Temple in Denver, Colorado, for the purpose of studying ancient history and applying the knowledge and wisdom gained to one's life. As it relates to descriptions about his overall character and personality, what we've learned about Claude Dodgins is that he had a very colorful and highly active imagination, not fully rooted in reality. Further to that end, it appears that Mr. Dodgins developed a reputation for engaging in fanciful and whimsical notions of unfounded and unproven theories. Let's review some of the claims, beliefs, and theories that he promoted during his time. A chance meeting with the Atlanteans. In 1931, Claude Dodgins claimed to have met two Atlanteans in Los Angeles, where they took him to a cave beneath Mount Shasta. The underground serpent races of the inner earth. Dodgins quickly developed a cosmology focused on the inner earth, describing underground races he claimed to have learned about from the Atlanteans. He developed theories of an underground serpent race, and during the 1950s, Dodgins incorporated aliens into his views. He ultimately combined these beliefs into a theory that in the second half of the 20th century, the serpent race would ally with the Antichrist. The UFOs piloted by serpent people. Dodgins believed that there were three types of flying saucers, including one piloted by serpent people, who were once icebound in Siberia, that once they became defrosted, they replaced and overthrew the communist regime in Russia. preparing for the Holocaust of nuclear war. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, Dodgens relocated the Brotherhood near Sedalia, Colorado, where he predicted that nuclear war would happen in 1953. He felt that his community would be protected by the mountains in the valley that they relocated to. This concludes part 1 of this video series. Be sure to watch part 2 of The Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean. Who is Maurice Doreal? The Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean. Who is Maurice Doreal? Part 2. Here in part 2 of this video series, we'll read, examine, and review information gathered from our second source about Maurice Doreal. Our second source is an article written by Charmaine Ortega Getz entitled, Maurice Doreal and His Brotherhood of the White Temple Awaited the Apocalypse in Colorado. Our source reference is posted on the westward.com website. Let's begin by reading the article. World War II was over, and the Cold War was just heating up when a metaphorical atomic age bomb burst in Colorado. The American science fiction community was still in an uproar over the Shaver mystery, the most sensational true story ever told, according to Amazing Stories magazine, a publication whose circulation had skyrocketed after it published I Remember Lemuria, a fantastic story purporting to be a memoir of the extraordinary subterranean world encounters of writer-artist Richard Sharp Shaver in 1945. The "Is this for real" controversy concocted by editor-in-chief Ray Palmer inspired Shaver mystery clubs to spring up around the country and fueled numerous letters from readers who shared similar memories, dreams, and alleged encounters with descendants of warring extraterrestrial races, the evil Darrow and the benign Tarot, who lived in the hollow earth. Life magazine called the phenomenon the most celebrated rumpus that rocked the science fiction world. One of those letters, published in the October 1946 issue of Amazing Stories, came from Dr. Maurice Doreal, the Denver-based supreme voice for the Ascended Masters, super-evolved human beings who live below Tibet. Doreal had recently announced that he was moving his Brotherhood of the White Temple from central Denver to rural Colorado to wait out the coming nuclear holocaust. Like Mr. Shaver, I have had personal contact with the Darrow and even visited their underground caverns, he now wrote. In the outer world, they are represented by an organization known loosely as the Black Brotherhood, whose purpose is the destruction of the good principle in man. The underground cities and caverns are, in the most part, protected by space warps, a science known to the ancients, but only touched on by modern science. I note that many are wanting to enter these caves. For one who has not developed a protective screen, this would be suicide, and one who revealed their location would be a murderer. He described the group that the Brotherhood represented as the White Lodge, or Supreme Council of the Ascended Masters. The Masters or Adepts do not rule. They guide and direct man in his spiritual evolution. Because so many have tried to make the White Lodge a supernatural thing, rather than what it is, a group of persons who have evolved mentally, physically, and spiritually ahead of the mass of mankind. Much misperception has arisen. It is the most coldly logical group I have ever contacted. Following his startling pronouncements, Doreal gave brief interviews to Time and Life magazines, then largely disappeared from public view, only to later resurface in his new Shambhala Ashrama compound near Sedalia, Colorado, where he awaited the post-nuclear resurrection. Maurice Doreal was born Claude D. Dodgen in pre-statehood Oklahoma on August 25, 1902, to Thomas D. and Alta Bell Dodgen. His father was a farmer and sometime day laborer, and Claude was the youngest of their 6 children. As with the children of most working class people at the time, Claude's formal education was limited to elementary school. This did not prove to be a handicap. He later claimed to have had his first encounter with an ascended master at age 3 and another at age 12. He also said he retained the experiences of previous incarnations so well that he didn't need to be taught anything by the time he emerged as Claude D. Dodgin, spelled Dodgin, or Claude Dodgins, spelled Doggins, which he also gave as his birth name. When I was born into this life, I had a full and complete memory of my past lives and incarnations, and I never had to study over again the forgotten things that most of us do. I did not have to learn to read and write. I did not have to learn mathematics or physics or chemistry or anything else, because in the past I had acquired that knowledge and had retained my attainments of the past, Doreal wrote, in personal experiences among the masters and great adepts in Tibet. The most precocious kid on the planet apparently kept a low profile about his early attainments. What they did prepare him for, he later explained, was a supernatural invitation in 1925 that took him from Wichita to Calcutta, where he was then guided to Darjeeling, and from there to the secret underground kingdom in Tibet, where the ascended masters and great adepts had their headquarters. There, he spent years studying esoteric knowledge before returning to Kansas as the anointed representative of the Great White Lodge to set up the Brotherhood of the White Temple. Doreal would later explain his lack of passport stamps by claiming that it was actually his astral presence that had made the journey. A marriage license archived at FamilySearch.org shows that Claude D. Dodgin, 25, and Ruth Proctor, 20, both of Altus, Oklahoma, were married in Chickasha, Oklahoma on September 4, 1927, by the Reverend A. H. Owen, a Baptist minister. According to city directories and the 1930 census, from at least 1929 to 1930, the couple lived in Wichita, where they had a son and a daughter. Apparently, even Dodgin's great attainments could not be used during the Great Depression for anything more than employment as a clerk, a cab driver, and a salesman for the Kansas Brokerage Company. By 1931, the Dodgin family was living in Oklahoma City, where Claude worked as a department store salesman. By 1932, the Dodgins were divorced. Ruth married a man who adopted the children and gave them his own name. The 1933 Oklahoma City Directory listed Claude D. Dodgin's occupation as president of the Brotherhood of the White Temple. By 1937, Dodgin had moved his base of operations to Los Angeles, where he and the second Mrs. split up. A United Press story dated June 21, 1937, chortled about the cross complaints filed between the occult leader and his wife. Margaret charged Claude with cheating on her, and Claude complained that she denounced him in front of his disciples. The U.S. Census taken on April 1, 1940, found Dr. C. D. Dodgin living in Bancroft, Colorado, a now defunct Jefferson County hamlet, at the Court Cottage camps on Morrison Road. He was described as a traveling minister who'd been a transient across country, no place of residence by 1935. The person who described Dodgin to the census taker was his third wife, Sonia. She said that she was born around 1908 in New York and had 4 years of college education, which she also claimed for her husband. Colorado state records show that the Brotherhood of the White Temple was officially incorporated in Denver on April 11, 1942, as a religious organization whose stated goal was to impart religious instruction to its members and to all others who may be interested in its doctrines and teachings. The 3 officers of the required board were listed as Dr. C. D. Dodgin, Dr. Carib Ramos, and Dr. Kenneth Stahl. Booklets written by Dr. Maurice Doreal, Dr. M. Doreal, or just Doreal, and published by the Brotherhood of the White Temple, neatly typed, crudely stenciled, mimeographed on cheap paper, and stapled together, began to appear soon after. Doreal's The Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean also debuted about this time. He claimed that he'd simply transcribed the work as he channeled the denizen of Atlantis. In appearance, it was about as impressive as all of Doreal's other early works, though it's written in a far more enigmatic style, one that has gained some popularity on occult and metaphysical websites and forums. Doreal's stream of booklets divided into two lines: an informational series for the general public, available at an additional cost of between 25 cents and $1, that outlined various esoteric beliefs, and a teaching series that was designed for neophytes, enrolled paying students of the Brotherhood's Correspondence School. It's likely that Doreal borrowed his mystery wisdom home study model from the ancient mystical order Rosicrucians, an organization founded in 1915 by Harvey Spencer Lewis. Thanks to Lewis's advertising talents, AMORC rose above competing Rosicrucian organizations to become a flourishing outfit by the 1930s, with large ads in national publications, especially magazines of popular science, science fiction, and mystery detective stories. To those familiar with the religion of Theosophy, founded by charismatic Russian Helena Blavatsky, Doreal's writings about the Great White Lodge and the Ascended Masters will seem curiously similar, if not an outright ripoff. Theosophy was a common launching pad for the multitude of seers, clairvoyants, mediums, white Mahatmas, yogis, gurus, and swamis who advertised in newspapers and magazines across America in the early 1900s. Doreal amassed one of the world's largest and finest occult and science fiction libraries, over 30,000 volumes, but all he seemed to distill out of his studies was a long series of repetitive and poorly written but highly imaginative booklets on occult subjects, wrote Walter Kafton Minkle, who researched Doreal for his 1989 book Subterranean Worlds, 100,000 Years of Dragons, Dwarfs, the Dead, Lost Races, and UFOs from Inside the Earth. In the early 40s, Doreal's Symbolism of the Great Seal of the United States had detailed hidden meanings of the symbol that appears on this country's official documents and currency in a few pages, but the rest of the booklet was dedicated to the coming of the Avatar, chosen by the Ascended Masters to establish a new age of enlightenment. With uncharacteristic modesty, Doreal said that he was only to be the voice or forerunner of the Avatar, who will appear on May 2, 1956 in America. This is the day when the present Earth cycle closes and the golden age of the seventh cycle will dawn. In several booklets, Doreal warned of the Serpent People, a race nearly identical to Shaver's snake-headed Darrow, and a fantasy feature first popularized by Robert E. Howard's The Shadow People in a 1929 issue of Weird Tales. Like the Darrow, the Serpent People could shapeshift to look like humans. By 1947, M and Sony Doreal were established at 430 East 10th Avenue in Denver. At the same time, Rerub Ramos, a misspelling of Kerub Ramos, Doreal's sometime partner and perhaps alter ego, since there's no real verification of his existence, was listed as living at 1600 Logan Street. That's the address of the William G. Fisher Mansion, a stunning edifice built in 1896 by a Denver department store magnate who died the following year. By the 40s, it was leased out to a variety of businesses, including the Brotherhood of the White Temple. Today, it's the home office of architect David Triba. It was from 1600 Logan that Doreal sent his missive to Amazing Stories, and also announced the imminent move of the Brotherhood to Sedalia. The Brotherhood wasn't the only thing that was moving. As public obsessions turned away from theosophy-ish exoticism in favor of the alarming possibilities posed by nuclear warfare, unidentified flying objects, and the Shaver mystery, Doreal's works began to shift focus too. In Mysteries of the Gobi, Doreal wrote of a civilization beneath the desert inhabited by a highly advanced, benign race similar to Shaver's Tarot folks, but with one distinct difference. Gobians were the real Hebrews who became priests to the Jews, but were not Jews themselves because Jesus was not of the Jewish race, but descended from the Gobians, who all had fair skin, blue eyes, and red or blonde hair. I had predicted atomic war years before it came, Doreal told the Rocky Mountain News in 1946. I saw atomic energy at work several years ago when the Dalai Lama of Tibet ushered me into the Great White Lodge 75 miles below the Himalayas. By 1948, in Flying Saucers, an Occult Viewpoint, Doreal was warning that the Serpent People had disposed of Joseph Stalin, and now the Supreme Council of the Soviet is controlled by beings far wiser than they appear. It was time to prepare for the apocalypse. All it took to buy into Shambhala Ashrama and prepare for the coming Holocaust was $500 per person and a personality that would blend in well with the program. And if nuclear war didn't actually hit, Doreal said, the community could become a summer resort. Newspapers and magazines had a lot of fun with the cult, led by a baldish little man, as the United Press referred to him in March 1948, who claimed to have met the current Dalai Lama's predecessor and knew when atomic weapons were about to be unleashed. He was photographed wearing gold robes, seated on a silver throne that he claimed was previously owned by the ill-fated Emperor Maximilian of Mexico, and proclaiming the new Shangri-La in the Rockies to be the center of occult wisdom in the West. Shambhala Ashrama was finally finished in 1953. It included about 100 homes, a two-story house of worship, some barracks-like buildings, and a nearby cave where food could be stored for the long haul. The lead in the rocky walls of the canyon would protect residents from nuclear fallout, Doreal said. Newspapers reported that the community was moving in for a population of about 800 residents, all told, and then the Brotherhood slammed the door on press interviews and uninvited outsiders. In February 1953, the Post said that The Voice has issued orders that no outsiders are permitted to enter the valley except necessary workmen. That same month, a Wall Street Journal story reported that the leader of the cult predicts the attacks in May or August or September. But months and then years, including the formerly epic coming of the Avatar year of 1956, passed with no further public pronouncements from The Voice. According to Colorado state records, Doreal died on November 28, 1963, although the Brotherhood of the White Temple still does not acknowledge his death on its website. That site also doesn't mention Drs. Kara Ramos or Kenneth Stahl, or even Doreal's widow, Sonia. Once referred to as an attractive young blonde by a newspaper reporter, she disappeared after her husband's death, although her name continued to appear on Doreal copyrights for some years. Brief mentions in newspaper articles indicate that after a reported power struggle that led to a few folks founding their own metaphysical church, some of Doreal's followers took over the Brotherhood, which remains based in the foothills of the Rampart Range between Castle Rock and Sedalia. Although its facilities were never needed as refuge from a nuclear holocaust, Shambhala Ashrama did not become a summer resort. Over the decades, some of the homes were reportedly sold to outsiders, but the compound remains off-limits to uninvited outsiders. While the Shaver mystery continues to fascinate sci-fi fans and inspire TV shows, movies, websites, rock concert posters, and books, Doreal remains a little-known fringe player in a realm in which science fiction merged with subterranean world truthiness and metaphysical religion. The Brotherhood is currently managed by a board, represented by Diane E. England. Contacted for an interview regarding the Brotherhood, England declined, citing unspecified inaccuracies in previous newspaper and book accounts. I know Halloween is coming up, and that's why you want to do a story now. I'm not stupid, she said, adding that any Westward representative who appeared on Brotherhood property would be arrested. The Brotherhood's Facebook page is blank. Its website proclaims without citation that the Brotherhood is an internationally acclaimed metaphysical organization, but otherwise provides little information beyond Doreal's claim to be the voice and the promise of learning Bible-based mysticism by ponying up indefinitely for church lessons. An online bookstore sells Doreal's vintage pronouncements and the Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean in a far glossier binding than it featured in the early days. There is also a donate button on the site to enable a love offering to the Brotherhood. Now that we have finished reading the article, we'll take a look at a historical timeline of events that occurred throughout Maurice Doreal's life. In 1902, Claude D. Dodgen was born in the month of August in Sulphur Springs, Oklahoma. In 1925, Claude Dodgen claimed to have visited the secret underground kingdom of the Ascended Masters in Tibet. In 1925, Claude Dodgen also claimed to have visited the Great Pyramid of Giza, where he discovered a set of ancient emerald tablets belonging to the Egyptian deity Thoth. Between 1929 and 1941, during the era of the Great Depression in America, Claude Dodgen worked as a clerk, a cab driver, a brokerage salesman, and a department store salesman. Between 1930 and 1932, Claude Dodgen established the Brotherhood of the White Temple. In 1933, an Oklahoma City directory listed Claude D. Dodgen's occupation as president of the Brotherhood of the White Temple. By 1935, Dodgen was described as a traveling minister who'd been a transient across country with no place of residence. In 1937, Dodgen divorced his second wife, complaining that she had denounced him in front of his disciples. In 1939, writing under the pseudonym M. Doreal, Dodgen published a book entitled The Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean. In 1942, the Brotherhood of the White Temple was officially incorporated in Denver, Colorado as a religious organization. In 1951, Dodgen relocated the Brotherhood of the White Temple to Sedalia, Colorado to escape the fallout of a nuclear holocaust. In 1963, Claude D. Dodgen died in the month of November, according to Colorado state records. Now that we have reviewed the historical timeline of events, let's do a summary and analysis of our source article at westward.com and review key points about Doreal's personal background and history. Maurice Doreal was born Claude D. Dodgen, spelled D-O-D-G-I-N, or Claude Dodgens, D-O-G-G-I-N-S, which he also gave as his birth name in pre-statehood Oklahoma on August 25, 1902. Dodgen's formal education was limited to elementary school. As Doreal, Dodgens claimed that he retained the experiences of previous incarnations so well that he didn't need to be taught anything by the time he came into his incarnation as Claude D. Dodgens. In his book entitled Personal Experiences Among the Masters and Great Adepts of Tibet, Doreal was quoted as saying, "When I was born into this life, I had a full and complete memory of my past lives and incarnations. I never had to study over again the forgotten things that most of us do. I did not have to learn to read and write. I did not have to learn mathematics or physics or chemistry or anything else because in the past I had acquired that knowledge and had retained my attainments of the past. Over the course of his lifetime, Dodgins married 3 different women, had 2 children with his first wife, and divorced 2 of his wives. Claude Dodgins worked in several roles as a clerk, a cab driver, a brokerage salesman, as well as a department store salesman during the era of the Great Depression. Throughout his history, Dr. Maurice Doreal wrote, authored, published, distributed, and collected over 30,000 books, booklets, and pamphlets, resulting in one of the world's largest and finest occult and science fiction libraries. According to Colorado State records, Doreal died on November 28, 1963. However, the Brotherhood of the White Temple still does not acknowledge his death on its website. In addition to Maurice Doreal's personal background and history, we will now review some of his claims, beliefs, and theories that we've read about here in Part 2. A first encounter of the curious kind. Maurice Doreal is said to have had his first encounter with an ascended master at the age of 3 and another at the age of 12. An invitation to travel to the Hidden Kingdom. In 1925, he claimed to have received a supernatural invitation to visit the secret underground kingdom of the Ascended Masters and the Great Adepts, whose headquarters were located in Tibet. According to Doreal, it was actually his astral presence, not his actual physical presence, that made the journey to Tibet, where he supposedly spent years studying esoteric knowledge within the hidden underground kingdom of the Masters. While in Tibet, Doreal not only was to have spent 8 years studying esoteric knowledge before returning to Kansas, but also claimed that he had been appointed as a representative of the Great White Lodge and that he was to set up the Brotherhood of the White Temple. As an appointed representative, Doreal considered himself to be the supreme voice for the Ascended Masters, a super-evolved race of human beings that lived below Tibet. In his description of the White Lodge, Doreal wrote that the lodge was comprised of a brotherhood of spiritual adepts known as the Supreme Council of Ascended Masters. He stated that the Masters or Adepts do not rule, but rather they guide and direct man in his spiritual evolution. He felt that they were the most logical group that he had ever contacted. Doreal also felt that much misperception had arisen with regard to the Brotherhood, as many thought of the White Lodge as a supernatural thing rather than a group of people who have mentally, physically, and spiritually evolved ahead of the masses of mankind. The Avatar and the New Age of Enlightenment. Only a few pages of Doreal's booklet, Symbolism of the Great Seal of the United States in 1940, was dedicated to revealing the hidden meanings of the symbol that appears on this country's official documents and currency. The rest of the booklet was dedicated to the coming of the Avatar, chosen by the Ascended Masters to establish a new age of enlightenment. In this portion of the booklet, Doreal modestly states that, I am only to be the voice, or forerunner, of the Avatar, who will appear on May 2nd, 1956 in America. This is the day when the present Earth cycle closes and the golden age of the 7th cycle will dawn. The Serpent People. In several of his booklets, Doreal warned of the Serpent People, a race nearly identical to Shaver's snake-headed Darrow, and a fantasy feature first popularized by Robert E. Howard's The Shadow People in a 1929 issue of Weird Tales. Like the Darrow, the Serpent People could shapeshift to look like humans. Extraterrestrials living inside the hollow Earth. In 1946, Dr. Maurice Doreal sent a letter to Amazing Stories, a science fiction publication which published his claims about having had personal contact with the Darrow, an evil extraterrestrial race that inhabits the inner hollows of inner Earth, and having visited their underground caverns. The underground cities of the hollow earth. In his letter, he stated that the underground cities and caverns are, for the most part, protected by space warps, a science known to the ancients but only touched on by modern science. He goes on to say that many are wanting to enter these caves. However, it would be suicide for those who have not developed a protective screen, and anyone revealing their location would be a murderer. The Black Brotherhood of Evil Extraterrestrials. Mr. Doreal further claimed that in the outer world, the evil Darrow were represented by an organization known as the Black Brotherhood, whose purpose is the destruction of the good principle in man. A fair-skinned, blue-eyed race beneath the desert. In Mysteries of the Gobi, Doreal wrote of a civilization beneath the desert, inhabited by a highly advanced, benign race similar to Shaver's Tarot folks, but with one distinct difference. Gobians were the real Hebrews who became priests to the Jews, but were not Jews themselves because Jesus was not of the Jewish race, but descended from the Gobians who all had fair skin, blue eyes, and red or blonde hair. Doreal's shift of imagination to remain relevant. With the rise of alarming possibilities posed by nuclear warfare, UFOs, and the lingering saga of the Shaver mystery, Doreal's works began to shift focus in keeping with the issues of the time. The Serpent People have overthrown Joseph Stalin. By 1948, Doreal warned in his book entitled Flying Saucers: An Occult Viewpoint that the Serpent People had disposed of Joseph Stalin, and now the Supreme Council of the Soviet is controlled by beings far wiser than they appear. A nuclear holocaust that never materialized. Motivated to protect himself and his followers from the unfounded threat of nuclear holocaust, Doreal moved the Brotherhood of the White Temple from central Denver to the new Shambhala Ashrama compound in a rural area outside of Sedalia, Colorado. In a 1946 interview with Rocky Mountain News, Doreal is quoted as saying, "I had predicted atomic war years before it came. I saw atomic energy at work several years ago when the Dalai Lama of Tibet ushered me into the Great White Lodge, 75 miles below the Himalayas." In 1948, Doreal claimed to have met the current Dalai Lama's predecessor and stated that he knew when atomic weapons were about to be unleashed. The fallout shelter that might become a resort. Photographed wearing gold robes while seated on a silver throne that Doreal claimed was previously owned by the ill-fated Emperor Maximilian of Mexico, Doreal proclaimed that the Shambhala Ashrama compound was the new Shangri-La of the Rockies and the center of occult wisdom in the West. In 1953, the Shambhala Ashrama compound was finally finished. Doreal stated that the lead in the rocky walls of the surrounding canyon would protect residents from nuclear fallout, and if nuclear war didn't actually hit, the community could become a summer resort. Distorted misperceptions of reality go unrealized. In 1953, the Post said that The Voice had issued orders that no outsiders are permitted to enter the valley except necessary workmen. In 1953, a Wall Street Journal story reported that the leader of the cult predicts the attacks in May, August, or September. But months and then years, to include the former epic of the coming of the Avatar in 1956, passed with no further public pronouncements from The Voice. This concludes part 2 of this video series. Be sure to watch part 3 of The Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean. Who is Maurice Doreal? The Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean. Who is Maurice Doreal? Part 3, Subpart 1. If you will recall from Section 2, Maurice Doreal stated that the ascended masters of the secret underground kingdom located in Tibet had appointed him to set up the Brotherhood of the White Temple. Here in Section 3, Part 1, we will read information gathered from 2 online sources in order to learn about the history and the stated purpose of the Brotherhood of the White Temple. Let's begin with our first source, posted on the encyclopedia.com website, entitled The Brotherhood of the White Temple. The Brotherhood of the White Temple is a theosophical occult organization founded in 1930 in Denver, Colorado by Maurice Doreal, the religious name of Claude Dodgens. A lifelong student of the occult, Doreal claimed to have spent 8 years in Tibet during the 1920s. He also claimed to have made contact with the Great White Lodge, the advanced beings who completed their work on Earth and who now, as masters, guide the destiny of humankind. Doreal was seen as the agent for the coming Golden Age. Associated with the Brotherhood is the White Temple Church. The Brotherhood was headquartered in Denver for many years, but immediately after World War II, in the atmosphere of anxiety over a possible atomic war, the Brotherhood built a new headquarters complex in Sedalia, Colorado, in a valley surrounded by high mountains. The headquarters were formally moved in 1951. 2 years later, in 1953, Doreal predicted the coming biblical battle of Armageddon for later in the year. It did not occur, but members continued to stockpile food and other resources they might need should war break out. The Brotherhood teaches a system of Gnosticism that draws heavily on theosophical and Kabbalistic writings. The human soul is pictured as a spark of the divine that has devolved into matter. This experience has overwhelmed the soul, which has lost the harmony it had after being created. Teachings emphasize methods of reestablishing harmony and, with the aid of the masters, returning to the divine realms. New members complete a series of lessons and progress through neophyte and temple grades, which can take 4 to 5 years, after which members are invited into the real inner work of the group. Some of the older members reside at the center in Colorado, but the great majority live around the country and stay in contact through correspondence. The organization publishes a periodical entitled Light on the Path and a set of booklets written by Doreal called The Little Temple Library. The more than 100 titles in the library cover a broad range of occult topics. Now that we have finished reading our first entry, we will now gather information from our second source, which happens to be from the website of the Brotherhood of the White Temple itself. Let's begin by reading a quote from Maurice Doreal. The Brotherhood of the White Temple, also referred to as Shambhala Ashrama, will be the Shangri-La of the Rockies and the center of occult wisdom in the West. Welcome to Shambhala. The Brotherhood of the White Temple is a metaphysical church founded in 1930 by Dr. M. Doreal, based upon the Universal Brotherhood of Man. The Brotherhood is also an internationally acclaimed metaphysical organization nestled in the Colorado Rocky Mountains. What does the Brotherhood teach? The Brotherhood gives to its members a complete instruction in all of the fundamental laws of the cosmos. It teaches the individual how to develop his own inner powers so that he becomes perfectly balanced on the 3 phases of manifestation: physical, mental, and spiritual. It teaches universal law in all of its aspects, so that the student learns the key truths, which enable him to strip the veil from the symbols of all philosophies and religions and find the true God behind all manifestations. These lessons are carefully prepared so that the student may learn the fundamental laws not only of the material, but also of the higher mental and spiritual planes. All lessons remain the property of the Brotherhood, being only loaned for the use of the student and must be returned if the membership is terminated. The instruction is separated into the following divisions. Weekly, they have church lessons. Bi-weekly, they have the ancient wisdom teachings, truth sheet, information from Brotherhood headquarters, Truth Workers Guild lessons, lectures by Brotherhood ministers and ministers in training. Monthly, they have a Fellowship of the Avatar lessons, 3 large issues a year for the Light on the Path magazine. The Brotherhood Church. The Brotherhood of the White Temple is a correspondence church. It offers a series of lessons on every branch of occult, metaphysical, and spiritual science, including healing. These lessons are divided into 4 neophyte and 12 temple grades. These 16 grades require approximately 4.5 years to complete. Each grade has from 12 to 27 lessons, 1 lesson being mailed each week. Upon completion of this course, the student may then be invited to enter the inner work of the Brotherhood. A contribution of $100 for a one-time entrance fee and $67 membership dues for the first month is required, which will be returned if the application is rejected for any reason. A further contribution of $67 each month is required as long as one remains a member. Upon being accepted for membership, you will be mailed the first lesson, a membership card, and a contribution card. What the Church teaches. The Brotherhood recognizes the fact that each soul manifests through a different vehicle and a different degree of consciousness and development. It knows that the problems of each individual are different, and for this reason, it desires to help you with your own particular obstacle. You may write the Brotherhood an explanation of your particular problem, and you will be shown how you may eliminate it according to divine law. It recognizes that perfect health is a vital factor in development, for if one is constantly beset by pain and illness, it is hard for the full power of consciousness to be turned toward the divine light. For this reason, it teaches the laws of perfect health according to the divine plan. It shows you how to overcome all physical disturbance so that your efforts toward spiritual unfoldment will be unhindered. It teaches you the way by which you may conquer space, time, and matter, and enter into the higher planes where the great adepts teach in a manner unknown to the material world. It shows you how to call upon your inner self for guidance in the problems which confront you in your daily life. It teaches you how you may attain liberation from the material and manifest in higher planes of consciousness. It teaches the location of the occult centers, spiritual and material, and how to awaken them so that the inner power of the soul may manifest in the material world. It shows you how to contact both the master within and the master without, so that you may fully comprehend and use the mighty divine laws of the universal consciousness. It teaches you how the creative spirit brought all things into manifestation and how to harmonize yourself with this creative principle. It teaches the laws of cosmogony and the secrets of God's plan for the universe. It teaches the secrets of alchemistry and the ancient Kabbalah. It teaches the secret meaning of symbols so that their understanding may be applied to all religions and philosophies. It teaches you how to rejuvenate and vitalize all of the organs of the body so that you may be more fully able to manifest in perfect of body, mind, and soul. The ancient yoga secrets of asana, posture, breath, and mantra, chant, are given in a manner suitable for the Western body as well as the Eastern body. It teaches you how to recover the knowledge attained in past lives by reading the Akashic or universal records. And finally, it teaches you how to become at one with the universal consciousness. All of the work given is for the purpose of developing your own inner power so that you may become a perfect instrument for the divine consciousness to manifest through. You learn to find the great masters of wisdom and coordinate your efforts with theirs so that more light may shine on a world of darkness. You learn how to find your own part in the great plan, so that you may perform the works best suited to your own talents. Ancient Wisdom Teachings. In addition to the metaphysical church lessons issued to the members of the Brotherhood, a course of lessons and sermons on metaphysical and religious instructions will be given bi-weekly. The Ancient Wisdom Teachings lessons contain explanations of the original Gnostic teaching of Jesus with metaphysical explanations and daily suggestions for spiritual concentration. The lessons are prepared with the idea of giving the seeker a correct understanding of the principles of the divine as expounded by Jesus and the great prophets of the Christian Bible. It is the belief of the Brotherhood that the true teachings of the Bible have been lost by the Orthodox churches. It is the purpose of the Brotherhood to restore these teachings to their original form, making them understandable to everyone, even the little child. To all members of the Ancient Wisdom Teachings, a lesson will be sent for every week of the month. These lessons very closely interconnect and support the teachings in the church lessons. These 2 units of study give a greater and clearer understanding of the mystical and occult truths and will explain the manner in which the seeker may utilize the truth principles in his everyday life. Therefore, enrollment in the Ancient Wisdom Teachings is required for those that enroll in the church course. The church lessons are designed to raise the inner self to liberation of the soul and spirit so that one can attune with the avatar and other masters throughout the universe. Begin your journey. No knowledge is forbidden to man when he has, by his own efforts, made himself ready to receive. So, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. Quote by Dr. M. Doreal. Having completed our readings, we will now do a summary and analysis of all of our sources up to this point in our research and review key points about the Brotherhood of the White Temple. In 1925, Maurice Doreal claimed to have received a supernatural invitation to visit the secret underground kingdom of the Ascended Masters and the Great Adepts, whose headquarters were located in Tibet. According to Doreal, it was actually his astral presence, not his actual physical presence, that made the journey to Tibet, where he supposedly spent years studying esoteric knowledge within the hidden underground kingdom of the Masters. While in Tibet, Doreal not only was to have spent 8 years studying esoteric knowledge before returning to Kansas, but also claimed that he had been appointed as a representative of the Great White Lodge and that he was to set up the Brotherhood of the White Temple. Founded in 1930 after moving to Denver, Colorado, Claude Dodgens, under the religious name Maurice Doreal, established the Brotherhood of the White Temple as a metaphysical church and a theosophical occult organization. In 1951, the Brotherhood of the White Temple relocated their headquarters from Denver to Sedalia, Colorado. Maurice Doreal referred to the relocated temple as Shambhala Ashrama, the Shangri-La of the Rockies and the center of occult wisdom in the West. Based upon the universal brotherhood of man, the mission statement for the Brotherhood of the White Temple is to restore the teachings of true knowledge and wisdom to their original form, making them accessible to everyone so that they have a clearer understanding of the mystical and occult truths. The temple and its brotherhood church was, and is, established for the purpose of teaching individuals how to attain the full power of consciousness. The intermediate goal of the individual is to achieve the harmonies of inner balance and to develop their own inner power in order to liberate the soul and spirit. The ultimate goal of the individual is to learn how to apply the principles of divine law, how to harness the spiritual properties of divine light, and how to make manifest their sole purpose in accordance with their divine plan. Through the Brotherhood Church, members receive course materials related to the occult, metaphysical, spiritual, and healing sciences. Lessons of instruction are accomplished on a weekly, bi-weekly, and monthly basis by way of mail correspondence and takes approximately 4.5 years to complete the entire course. The itemized cost associated with applying for membership to the Brotherhood Church is as follows. A one-time entrance fee of $100. First month membership dues are $67, and an active monthly membership is $67 per month. First month membership dues will be returned if the application is rejected. If accepted for membership, the first lesson, a membership card, and a contribution card will be mailed to the new member. Additionally, members also receive the Light on the Path magazine 3 times per year, which is published and distributed by the Brotherhood Church. This concludes Part 3, Subpart 1 of this video series. Be sure to watch Part 3, Subpart 2 of The Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean. Who is Maurice Doreal? The Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean. Who is Maurice Doreal? Part 3, Subpart 2. Here in Section 3, Part 2, we will go back in time to learn about the history and the process for interpreting, translating, and transcribing ancient texts, and compare this process to Maurice Doreal's experience of interpreting, translating, and transcribing his most popular book. We'll begin with an overview of Maurice Doreal's history, as well as his accomplishments and achievements. We will then examine information gathered from our sources in order to determine whether or not there are the instances for the evidence of plagiarism within Doreal's book entitled The Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean. Did Maurice Doreal capitalize on the pre-existing works of other occultists? So far, what we have learned about Claude Dodgins, also known as Maurice Doreal or M. Doreal, is that he was an occultist who had an interest in theosophy and the esoteric studies of the arcane, to include the metaphysical principles of Kabbalism and the spiritual principles of Gnosticism. According to research and information gathered from our sources, it appears that Maurice Doreal may have been influenced by the works of Helena P. Blavatsky, Manly P. Hall, G. I. Gurdjieff, P. D. Uspensky, Alice Bailey, and others who spearheaded the occult movement of the mid-19th to early 20th centuries. It is also possible that Doreal may have been influenced by the work of Athanasius Kircher, who chronicled his interpretations of Egyptian hieroglyphs in his book entitled Oedipus Aegypticus. Having been inspired by the popular occultists of his time, it would be over the course of his life that Doreal would accomplish 3 main things. Writer and author. Maurice Doreal wrote, authored, published, and distributed books, booklets, and pamphlets related to matters of the occult and the esoteric sciences. The overall focus and theme of his written works is dedicated to the spiritual development of man. Out of all the books that Doreal is said to have authored, The Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean is among the most popular. Builder and architect. Claiming to follow a directive given by the ascended masters of the Great Adepts, Maurice Doreal founded the Brotherhood of the White Temple, also referred to as Shambhala Ashrama. In accordance with the Universal Brotherhood of Man, he also established the Brotherhood Church. Collector and archivist. In addition to writing, authoring, publishing, and distributing his own series of books, Doreal is said to have amassed over 30,000 volumes of books and ancient texts related to the occult and esoteric sciences. Available in the online store on the Brotherhood of the White Temple website, the Little Temple Library is a collection of works written by Maurice Doreal and is comprised of 100-plus booklets, pamphlets, and literature on various subjects related to the occult, as well as esoteric and metaphysical studies. Accomplishments, achievements, and speculation. Although Maurice Doreal achieved some level of notoriety for his personal achievements, as well as his contributions to the occult movement, there is some speculation surrounding the academic integrity and authenticity of some of his works. If you will recall from our source readings, we read several examples where Doreal may have gone so far as to attribute to himself concepts, ideas, and works that actually originated with others. Let's take a closer look at some of these examples and revisit key points from our source readings. Dodgen's wife expresses doubt. When Claude Dodgen divorced his second wife in 1937, he complained that she had denounced him in front of his disciples. Why would Dodgen's wife denounce him? What was the subject of her denouncement? Raising questions about imitation and plagiarism. In a source article posted on westward.com entitled, Maurice Doreal and His Brotherhood of the White Temple Awaited the Apocalypse from Colorado, contributing writer Charmaine Ortega Getz says, it's likely that Doreal borrowed his mystery wisdom home study model from the ancient mystical order Rosicrucis, an organization founded in 1915 by Harvey Spencer Lewis. Getz goes on to say that, to those familiar with the religion of Theosophy, founded by charismatic Russian Helena Blavatsky, Doreal's writings about the Great White Lodge and the Ascended Masters will seem curiously similar, if not an outright ripoff. To further underscore the fact that Claude Dodgen seemed to lack academic substance, Ortega Getz cites a statement of observation on the part of Walter Kafton Minkle, who researched Doreal for his 1989 book, Subterranean Worlds, 100,000 Years of Dragons, Dwarfs, the Dead, Lost Races, and UFOs from Inside the Earth, where the author is quoted as saying, Maurice Doreal produced a long series of repetitive, poorly written, but highly imaginative booklets on occult subjects. In addition to describing booklets written by Doreal as neatly typed, crudely stenciled, mimeographed on cheap paper, and stapled together, Ortega Getz states that, in appearance, the Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean was about as impressive as all of Doreal's other early works, though it's written in a far more enigmatic style. After reading Ortega Getz's description of Doreal's writing style within the Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean and comparing it to his other works, one is left with the impression that some obvious difference exists. I was curious about Ortega Getz's use of the word enigmatic to describe this departure in writing styles. From the Cambridge Dictionary, the word enigmatic is defined as follows. Enigmatic, mysterious and impossible to understand completely. From our source at Wikipedia, we learned that in 1925, Doreal claimed to have visited the Great Pyramids of Giza, where he discovered a set of ancient emerald tablets belonging to the Egyptian deity Thoth, whom he reimagined as a king of Atlantis. Some will find it rather curious that the writer posting this entry on Wikipedia.com just so happened to use the word reimagined to describe Doreal's interpretation and subsequent writing of the Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean. According to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, the word reimagine is defined as follows. Reimagine, to form a new conception of, to recreate, to imagine again, or imagine anew. So it would seem that we not only have an obvious difference in writing styles, but we are also confronted with the possibility that whatever was discovered or obtained in its original form may have been reimagined to be something other than it was originally intended to be. Because according to our review of another source, which happens to be a website by the name of Occult Mysteries, The Path to Light, it is as a result of investigative research into the validity of the material contained within Maurice Doreal's book entitled The Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean, that the creator of the 12 Afterwards commentary demonstrates through comparative analysis how Doreal's book is actually a modified version of original ideas and concepts borrowed from other authors. The following is an example of how the content creator for the site compares a paragraph from Tablet 1, The History of Thoth the Atlantean, as it was interpreted and written by Maurice Doreal, to a paragraph contained within the book entitled The Secret Doctrine, written by Helena P. Blavatsky. The following are the examples. From Tablet 1, The History of Thoth the Atlantean, the author Maurice Doreal wrote, "In obedience to the law, the word of the master grew into flower. Downward into the darkness turned the thoughts of the Atlanteans, until at last in his wrath arose from his Aguanti, the dweller. This word has no English equivalent. It means a state of detachment, speaking the word, calling the power." So now let's compare that to The Secret Doctrine, written by Helena P. Blavatsky. "The sins of men have become so black that earth quivers in her great agony. 1 night and 2 days only shall the lords of the dark face live on this patient land. She is doomed, and they have to descend with her." The content creator for the 12 Afterwards commentary states, "It is clear from this where Doreal obtained his version of the destruction of Atlantis." The creator of the Occult Mysteries, The Path to Light website provides numerous examples of comparison and analysis between the works of other authors, occultists, etc., and the work produced by Maurice Doreal. Now that we have reviewed several source examples related to the validity and authenticity of the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean, and their conclusions regarding the academic character and integrity of Maurice Doreal as the author of the book, let's take a closer look at another one of Doreal's accomplishments. Did Maurice Doreal actually build a large metaphysical library of rare, obscure books? According to the Brotherhood of the White Temple website, the only reference to a library that exists is the Little Temple Library, a collection of works written by Maurice Doreal that is comprised of 100+ booklets, pamphlets, and literature on various subjects related to the occult, as well as esoteric and metaphysical studies. However, from our source article located on the westward.com website, Charmaine Ortega Getz cites author Walter Kafton Minkle when he states, "Doreal amassed one of the world's largest and finest occult and science fiction libraries, over 30,000 volumes." After reading Walter Kafton Minkle's description of Doreal's occult and science fiction library, I am left with the impression that a large physical library exists, one that would be separate and distinct from the Little Temple Library that is only comprised of 100+ booklets written by Maurice Doreal, according to the Brotherhood of the White Temple website. When we conducted further research into the existence of a library large enough to hold 30,000 books, we found another information source that reiterates Kafton Minkle's description. The title of this web page is Claude D. Dodgen, aka Maurice Doreal, as a Fortean. The content creator for this website states, presumably throughout his life, but certainly in the 1940s, Dodgen was busy putting together a library. At its height, the library reportedly had some 30,000 volumes, an equivalent of the Manly P. Hall Library in California. The library apparently also had a lot of fantasy, as Dodgen was a fan of pulp fantasy from an early age. This particular source speaks to the existence of a library in a past tense term, as if once upon a time it may have existed but does no longer. The result of our own efforts to locate additional information with regard to such a library has netted 0 verifiable results. So it begs the following set of questions. If a library of this scale, housing 30,000 volumes of books, texts, documents, etc., exists, where is it physically located? If said library does not actually exist in physical brick-and-mortar form, is it possible that its archive exists online in electronic form? If so, where? In addition to the books, booklets, and pamphlets that Claude Dodgens, as Maurice Doreal wrote, published, and distributed, from where and from whom did Doreal acquire such a collection of books that are said to have been amassed? On a final note, and at the last minute, I decided that I should visit the Manly P. Hall Library website before moving on to the next section in this series. And wouldn't you know? The title of this web entry is The Manly P. Hall Library, and the source is the Philosophical Research Society. Manly P. Hall, born 1901, and Maurice Doreal, born 1898 or 1902, there is some discrepancy as to his birth date depending on the source. They were both born around the same time, with both pursuing similar interests within the field of occult studies during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Mr. Hall outlived Doreal by around 27 years. According to the general information page of the website, Mr. Hall founded the Philosophical Research Society in 1934 and was its first president, remaining so until his death in 1990. Hall amassed an extraordinary collection of rare books and artifacts from his extensive travels. Manly P. Hall traveled extensively and assembled a magnificent library. Founded in 1934, the Philosophical Research Society is a repository of multicultural wisdom sources and a center of learning with a unique library containing over 30,000 rare volumes. Do key points within the general information page for the Manly P. Hall Library sound familiar? They should, because we just finished reviewing information from sources that we had cited about the existence of a library having been established by Maurice Doreal. Let's refer to this source once again and compare notes. From our source article located on the westward.com website, Charmaine Ortega Getz cites author Walter Kafton Minkle when he states, Doreal amassed one of the world's largest and finest occult and science fiction libraries, over 30,000 volumes. So it looks like Walter Kafton Minkle was either misquoted or he mistakenly referred to Maurice Doreal when he should have been referring to Manly P. Hall when he was quoted about the 30,000 volumes of rare books amassed within an impressive occult and science fiction library. Sometimes things get lost or inadvertently mixed up in translation. At best, it appears that the issue with regard to the existence of a library built and established by Maurice Doreal has been resolved. Let's move on to the next point in our research. Having reviewed questions with regard to Doreal's accomplishments and achievements, and the evidence which supports the notion that he may have copied and modified the work of others in the creation and development of his own works, we will now take a look at his works from another point of literary perspective. Deciphering, decoding, and interpreting ancient texts, books, and manuscripts. If you will recall from our readings in Section 1 and 2, we learned that in 1925, Claude D. Dodgens, or Maurice Doreal, claimed to have traveled to Tibet by way of astral projection. While in Tibet, he further claims to have been taught by the ascended masters of the great adepts who reside within a hidden underground kingdom in the Himalayas, learning and studying the mysticism of the occult and esoteric concepts for a period of 8 years. During the same year in 1925, Doreal claimed to have visited the Great Pyramids of Giza, where he is said to have discovered a set of ancient emerald tablets belonging to the Egyptian deity Thoth, whom he reimagined as a king of Atlantis. Once he was in possession of the tablets, Doreal then claimed to have translated the text and then transcribed the work by way of channeling the denizen of Atlantis, which he then published as the Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean. Now that we have summarized when, how, and the way in which Doreal was to have written the book, we want to compare his experience as an interpreter and translator to the experience of other interpreters and translators in order to better understand and appreciate the process of deciphering, decoding, and interpreting ancient texts, books, and manuscripts. Sometimes things get lost or inadvertently mixed up in translation. Throughout history, individuals have copied original works from original authors for the purpose of preserving and archiving the original content contained within an original work, such as books, manuscripts, documents, ancient scrolls, etc. It requires great skill on the part of individuals who undertake the task of deciphering, decoding, and interpreting written works that contain symbols, letters, and/or characters that may or may not have a current framework of literary reference. For example, a list or table of conversion that can accurately define a character or symbol and then convert it into a different language other than the one it was originally written in. The process of interpretation requires a high level of integrity, skill, and an intense level of focus on the part of the individual who is attempting to translate a work from one form to another. All the while, the goal is to ensure that they are preserving the original intent as it was intended by the original author, and to remain scrupulously unbiased during the process of interpretation, translation, and transcription. This is easier said than done. The greatest challenge as an interpreter or translator is to remain objective about the work being transcribed from one form to another. However, the chief difficulty lay in not allowing the personal bias of subjectivity to impact or affect the content of original intention for the work being translated. In order to demonstrate the challenges associated with the laborious and arduous task of deciphering, decoding, and interpreting ancient texts, we will read and review information from 3 online sources so that we can compare historically documented processes to Claude Dodgen's or Maurice Doreal process for interpreting and translating the Emerald Tablets. With that said, we'll take a trip back down the memory lane of ancient history to see how attempts at interpreting the original content of ancient works can easily get lost in the translation of personal bias. Let's begin. Historical processes related to the reproduction, preservation, and archiving of ancient texts. Our first source, posted on the History Stack Exchange website, is entitled, "Where Are the Ancient Books Now?" This particular entry gives us an introductory overview into the life of ancient scribes and the methods that were used in the interpreting and transcribing of ancient documents. In Roman Greek times, before 300 AD, there were no books in the Roman Empire, just papyrus scrolls, each chapter being one scroll. So a work like the Republic would be divided into many scrolls. Papyrus is relatively perishable, so virtually none of these scrolls survived, with only a few isolated exceptions. The works have survived, however, because they were copied either by individual scholars or by being copied en masse in scriptoriums. In a scriptorium, a master reader, called a lectorius, would recite the word and scribes would write it down as he spoke it. Another method of copying, more precise, was to use the punct, a sharp stick. With the left hand, the copyist would place the point of the punct below the letter being copied and write it with the right hand. Then he would move the punct to the next letter and repeat the process. Our word punctilius comes from this process. Every library in medieval times had a scriptorium. They would borrow scrolls or books, copy them for their library, then send them back. Our second source, posted on the wikipedia.com website, is entitled Library of Alexandria. We'll begin by reading about the early expansion and organization of the library and their efforts to collect, interpret, and transcribe all books and literary materials that came into the ancient port of Alexandria. Every library in medieval times had a scriptorium. The Ptolemaic rulers of their time intended for the Great Library of Alexandria to be a collection of all knowledge, and the rulers worked to expand the library's collections through an aggressive and well-funded policy of book purchasing. Royal agents were dispatched with large amounts of money in order to purchase and collect as many texts as they possibly could about any subject and by any author. Older copies of texts were favored over new ones, since it was assumed that older copies had undergone less copying and that they were therefore more likely to closely resemble what the original author had written. This program involved trips to the book fairs of Rhodes and Athens. According to the Greek medical writer Galen, under the decree of Ptolemy II, any books found on ships that came into port were taken to the library, where they were copied by official scribes. The original texts that had been confiscated remained within the library, and the copies of these original texts were delivered back to the book owners. Our third source comes from a book entitled Libraries Before Alexandria, where the authors have documented the existence of ancient libraries long before the building of the Great Library at Alexandria. Ancient Egypt and Western Asia had a library tradition many centuries before the advent of the Greek script and the building of the Great Library of Alexandria. Here, the existence of libraries can be traced back another 2 millennia, from the 27th century BCE to the 3rd century CE, and so the creation of the library in Alexandria was not as much the beginning of an intellectual adventure as the impressive culmination of a very long tradition. The libraries in Egypt and Western Asia were centers of knowledge prior to the famous Library of Alexandria. Our fourth source, posted on the dartmouthcollege.edu website, is entitled Medieval Book Production and Monastic Life. This particular entry gives us a deeper level of insight into the process for interpreting and transcribing ancient works. We'll go back in time to the 4th century and read about the monastic life of monks and the various challenges that they faced in their roles as monastery scribes. It wasn't until the 4th century AD that the medieval world was introduced to monastic life in the form of a devout Egyptian Christian named Pachomius that thought it was a good idea to have an isolated space to be humbly miserable and to worship God at the same time. His concept spread rapidly throughout the Eastern Roman Empire, and with it, his expectation for all monks to be literate. About 200 years later, in 529 AD, Benedict established Monte Cassino, a soon-to-be famous Italian monastery close to Rome and Naples, and took literacy one step further than his predecessors. His Rule of Saint Benedict provides some guidelines for monastic life at Monte Cassino, including a section called On Daily Manual Labor, where reading is one of the compulsory activities built into a monk's very regimented schedule. Soon after, Cassiodorus founded Vivarium in South Italy and pushed for more than just idly reading texts. He made copying them yet another compulsory task. Suddenly, as per popular adoption of Cassiodorus Institute's rulebook, copying texts of all kinds became an important and highly pretentious part of life in monasteries. He saw copying biblical texts as spreading the message of the Christian religion and fighting with pen and ink against the unlawful snares of the devil, which seems as noble a purpose as any for devout monks to perform daily as part of their grueling manual labor. And trust me, it was grueling. The process. The process of medieval copying, however biblical or holy, was highly taxing. Cassiodorus' overenthused attitude about copying the good word was certainly not shared by the scribes that actually did the copying in monasteries, but that was in fact the point of manual labor. Cassiodorus pores over correct and precise copying techniques and suggestions on how to improve your grammar and spelling in institutes, showing just how detailed and systematic copying became during this time. Because of these close details, copying text required great skill and tons of training on behalf of the scribe, and finishing a single copy could take weeks, even with long hours devoted only to writing. A monastic scribe would work for at least 6 hours a day, and the best ones would work more than that. Cassiodorus specifically exempts the best of the best from daily prayers, so they may have more time to work. Those round-the-clock special scribes also graciously received an abundance of candles and a clock, so they may work past sunset and watch their life slowly tick away while they toiled. A single room of the monastery, called the scriptorium, acted as the workshop for scribes and was usually isolated, mandatorily quiet, and not very comfortable. Monks who worked under these conditions frequently suffered from acedia, a foul darkness that causes the affected to act anxious, apathetic, and hopeless, as if the sun was too slow in setting. In other words, clinical depression. Often scribes would express their anguish in the margins of a manuscript they copied in the form of little pleas of mercy. One even writes, at the end of his script, "Now I've written the whole thing. For Christ's sake, give me a drink." The unavoidable problems. The length of the text was far from the only problem for medieval monks tasked with copying. Since all manuscripts were copied by hand, some form of human error corrupts them, whether it is skipping over words or perhaps entire lines, misspellings, false interpretations, or hypercorrections. Even the best of scribes could easily succumb to any of these errors by accident, corrupting their manuscript without knowing, contributing to the confusion of present scholars trying to figure out what the original manuscript said. Because of the commonality of these errors, the exemplar the monk would copy his own manuscript, which could possibly contain major flaws, unavoidable in his own script, even if he himself made no mistakes. Of course, monasteries did their best to avoid all corruptions, implementing a rule that monks were only supposed to copy what they saw on the page and not try to correct the errors they may or may not have seen in their exemplar. But this did not protect them from all corruption, especially when monks didn't understand the text in front of them. Language barriers frequently separated a monk from his exemplar. A Latin-speaking monk may be asked to copy down a Greek text, but even if the text was in Latin, it was a very different form of Latin than what he would be used to. By the Middle Ages, the Latin language had regionalized and evolved into something that was nothing like the archaic Latin of ancient Rome, both in grammar and syntax, much like the difference between modern English and Middle English. Some people thought this was for the best. Poggio, a major and enthusiastic figure in copying culture during the Renaissance, believed that understanding the text was not favorable, as it would introduce the possibility of more hypercorrection errors because monks would feel more comfortable correcting their own language. This would make the manuscripts more precise in their readings, but may be dangerous if a scribe was unable to recognize if he himself made a major error in copying a foreign language. Past the physical pen to parchment copying of the production process was equally as difficult and specialized. Scribes, illustrators, and bookbinders would often be separate in their professions because of the level of skill and amount of time needed to adequately perform each part of the process. The scribe would copy a text, then hand it off to the illustrator, if there even were illustrations, usually only seen in later manuscripts, and then it would be given to a binder to be sewn together at last. This process took copious amounts of time as well, not just because the tasks in themselves are time consuming, but the book also may have had to travel to different monasteries or workshops in order for illuminations or bindings to be completed. Monastic reading culture. Despite these literary pursuits majorly dominating monastic life, the reading culture present in monasteries was not a positive reinforcement of a love for the written word so forced upon the monks. Reading and copying were indeed treated as manual labor, and that added a negative connotation of an intense distaste for reading. Benedict's rule creates daily silent meals, where no one was allowed to speak for any reason other than the weekly reader, the person in charge of mandating a certain holy book or other to the entire dining room. Even the weekly reader's enthusiasm for reading was crushed, because the rule dictates that the reader should pray to God for salvation from pride in his important task of reading to the masses. The Carolingian Revival. Still, for some reason, monks kept on copying. From the start of the boom in copying practices in the 4th century AD, Greek and Latin mythical and literary classics were the predominant texts copied up until about the 6th century, when Christian texts started to replace them due to the rise of the Christian religion. Here, the Dark Ages of Greek and Latin literature descended upon ancient manuscripts, neglected on monasteries' library shelves, not to be copied because of newfound disinterest in them as compared to Christian texts. This neglect caused the older manuscripts to decay faster than they normally would, because no one was particularly interested in their well-being. Some pagan manuscripts were even reused for writing new biblical copies down, because of the high cost of parchment. The old ink would either be washed or more commonly scraped off, and the new text written over to create a palimpsest, literally Greek for scraped again. Most manuscripts from antiquity don't survive to the present day because of these and other natural causes. Some interest in pagan literature still survived, of course. In the Greek Byzantine Empire, where the people never truly stopped caring about their ancient mythology, but got close to forgetting about it for a while. What manuscripts survived only survived because of the strength of the papyrus or parchment they were written on until about the mid-8th to the early 9th century, when a classical revival took place. There was the Carolingian Revival, when the first Holy Roman Emperor Charlemagne reinvigorated the learning spirit in monasteries across the empire. He recruited major scholarly figures and poets from around the world to gather at his palace, which became a center for scholarship with its vast library of Charlemagne himself. Monastic libraries once again flourished, and copying of Greek and Latin classics restarted, this time on an unprecedented scale under Charlemagne's reign. Illumination finally came into use, although very archaic, literally borrowing motifs from antiquity, at first with limited colors, but breaking out into elaborate designs seen in canon tables and copies of the Bible and colored initials to start the major lines of a text. Special scholarly editions of manuscripts also started to be published, with scholia or commentary paratext taking up stretches of the page longer than the actual text itself. The 9th century Renaissance in the Eastern Byzantine Empire mostly focused on this newfound scholarship, with the founding of literary and poetic groups and the refounding of schools in major cities. The Carolingian Revival is the single most important event in classical literary history because of this sudden extreme interest in classical texts that were copied and spread like wildfire. This single-handedly saved ancient texts, which do not have any surviving manuscripts from antiquity, making the Carolingian era manuscripts the only surviving and most important texts we have. It is because of those book productions in the medieval world that we have most of the Greek and Latin classics we have today, which just may validate all the hard work done by scribal monks living quietly in the far remote reaches of society so long ago. Now that we have finished reading information gathered from our sources, we will now conduct a summary and analysis and review key points related to the preservation and archiving of ancient texts. The ancient libraries of antiquity. Ancient Egypt and Western Asia had a library tradition many centuries before the advent of the Greek script and the building of the Great Library of Alexandria. The libraries in Egypt and Western Asia, to include Sumer, Assyria, Mesopotamia, Babylon, etc., were centers of knowledge prior to the famous Library of Alexandria. So, the creation of the library in Alexandria was not as much the beginning of an intellectual adventure as it was the impressive culmination of a very long tradition. The writing and rewriting of history in the making. In Greco-Roman times, original works of antiquity survived because they were copied either by individual scholars or copied en masse in scriptoriums. A master reader would recite the word, and scribes would write it down as he spoke it. During the expansion of the Great Library of Alexandria, royal agents were dispatched with large amounts of money in order to purchase and collect as many texts as they possibly could about any subject and by any author. Older copies of texts were favored over newer ones, since it was assumed that older copies had undergone less copying and that they were therefore more likely to closely resemble what the original author had written. Any books found on ships that came into port were taken to the library, where they were copied by official scribes. The original texts that had been confiscated remained within the library, and the copies of these original texts were delivered back to their book owners. The monastery scribes, who were the monks that toiled in the ancient scriptoriums. During medieval times, Cassiodorus pushed for monks within the monasteries to do more than just idly read texts. He made their copying of ancient texts yet another compulsory task. Copying texts of all kinds became an important part of life in the monasteries and was considered to be a grueling form of manual labor. The process of medieval copying, whether biblical or holy, was highly taxing. Requiring great skill and tons of training, monastic scribes worked an average of 6 hours per day, copying volumes of text which could take weeks. A single room of the monastery, called the scriptorium, acted as the workshop for scribes and was usually isolated, mandatorily quiet, and not very comfortable. Monks who worked under these conditions frequently suffered from acedia, a foul darkness that causes the affected to act anxious, apathetic, and hopeless, as if the sun was too slow in setting. In other words, clinical depression. Since all manuscripts were copied by hand, some form of human error corrupts them, whether it is skipping over words or entire lines, resulting in misspellings, false interpretations, or hypercorrections, corrupting their manuscript without knowing and contributing to the confusion of present-day scholars trying to figure out what the original manuscript said. Monasteries did their best to avoid all corruptions, implementing a rule that monks were only supposed to copy what they saw on the page and to not correct the errors they may or may not have seen in their exemplar. However, this did not protect from all corruption, especially when monks didn't understand the text in front of them. Language barriers frequently separated a monk from his exemplar. During the Renaissance, some monastic promoters of copying culture believed that understanding the text was not favorable, as it would introduce the possibility of more hypercorrection errors, because monks would feel more comfortable correcting their own language. They held the belief that this would make the manuscripts more precise in their readings, but may be dangerous if a scribe was unable to recognize if he himself made a major error in copying a foreign language. Scribes, illustrators, and bookbinders would often be separate in their professions because of the level of skill and amount of time needed to adequately perform each part of the process. The scribe would copy a text, then hand it off to the illustrator, if there were even illustrations, usually only seen in later manuscripts, and then it would be given to a binder to be sewn together at last. The book also may have had to travel to different monasteries or workshops in order for illuminations or bindings to be completed. Everything that we think we know about history is wrong. Our history largely depends upon who is interpreting it. A comparison of process and approach. Now that we have completed our review of key points related to the preservation and archiving of ancient texts, how does Doreal's claims of using a form of channeling to interpret, translate, and transcribe ancient texts compare to the historically documented processes of interpretation, translation, and transcription as it were accomplished by scribes in ancient history? As we have learned, the act of translation is not an easy process. In addition to the amount of time and effort that is required to decipher, decode, and translate documents, manuscripts, books, etc., there is the additional expenditure of time and effort in the final interpretation and transcription of the end result. From our source readings, we have learned of Maurice Doreal's claims that he interpreted the Emerald Tablets by way of channeling Thoth. As a result, Doreal wrote and authored the book, The Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean. To get a better idea of the interpretive process that Doreal experienced, let's take a look at 3 different definitions for the word channeling. Our first source for the definition of the word channeling comes from dictionary.com, and channeling is defined as the practice of professedly entering a meditative or trance-like state in order to convey messages from a spiritual guide. Our second source is Collins Dictionary, where channeling is defined as, in some New Age beliefs, the process by which a person becomes a conduit for a deceased person as someone from an ancient culture who imparts information about a previous life. And then finally, our third source is the Free Dictionary, where channeling is defined as the act or practice of serving as a medium through which a spirit guide purportedly communicates with living persons. Although it is a very different approach as compared to the manual efforts of labor on the part of the ancient scribes to interpret and translate information, the idea or act of channeling, in comparison to the rigorous interpretive processes that the ancient scribes undertook, leaves one with the impression that the act of channeling is not as demanding or as arduous a task as evidenced within the ancient scriptoriums. That is not to say that channeling, as a form of metaphysical communication and instruction, doesn't have its challenges. It's just that the time and effort expended within both types of processes doesn't seem to equate. As it relates to the process of deciphering and decoding characters and symbols, the Emerald Tablets are said to be encoded with a series of unique characters and symbols encoded in the Atlantean language, and that they are engraved within and throughout a series of tablets whose material composition is of imperishable construction. At this point, it is important to get some perspective on what Doreal was said to have accomplished over the course of his lifetime. For this, we'll need to establish a frame of context as it relates to his activities within a certain period. We'll review once again the historical timeline of events and occurrences that we developed in Section 2, as well as a bibliographical history of the books Doreal wrote and published within a specified period in history. Let's begin. In 1902, Claude D. Dodgen was born in the month of August in Sulphur Springs, Oklahoma. In 1925, Claude Dodgen claimed to have visited the secret underground kingdom of the Ascended Masters in Tibet. In 1925, Claude Dodgen also claimed to have visited the Great Pyramid of Giza, where he discovered a set of ancient emerald tablets belonging to the Egyptian deity Thoth. Between 1929 and 1941, during the era of the Great Depression in America, Claude Dodgen worked as a clerk, a cab driver, a brokerage salesman, and a department store salesman. Between 1930 and 1932, Claude Dodgen established the Brotherhood of the White Temple. In 1933, an Oklahoma City directory listed Claude D. Dodgen's occupation as president of the Brotherhood of the White Temple. By 1935, Dodgen was described as a traveling minister who'd been a transient across country with no place of residence. In 1937, Dodgen divorced his second wife, complaining that she had denounced him in front of his disciples. In 1939, writing under the pseudonym M. Doreal, Dodgen published a book entitled The Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean. In 1942, the Brotherhood of the White Temple was officially incorporated in Denver, Colorado as a religious organization. In 1951, Dodgen relocated the Brotherhood of the White Temple to Sedalia, Colorado to escape the fallout of a nuclear holocaust. In 1963, Claude D. Dodgen died in the month of November, according to Colorado state records. We have now come to the bibliography and a partial listing of books written by Claude D. Dodgen, who wrote under the pseudonym Maurice Doreal, as well as the pen name M. Doreal. Our source is an entry entitled Maurice Doreal, located on the Kook Science website. The following is a listing of books that Doreal wrote, published, and distributed over a 14-year period between 1925 and 1939. In the 1920s, Spiritual Power Magnetic Healing was written in 1929. In the 1930s, Material in Harmony and How to Overcome It was written in 1937. Divine Healing was written in 1937. Pineal Eye was written in 1937. Personal Magnetism was written in 1937. The Four Planes of Healing, Guide for the Metaphysical Healer was written in 1938. The Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean was written in 1939. Asana, Breath, and Mantram, a complete course in the essentials of yoga, especially adapted for the Western student, was written in 1939. Historical frame of context related to Maurice Doreal's activities over the course of his lifetime. Questions and observations. Having reviewed the historical timeline of events and occurrences and a bibliographical history of the books Doreal wrote and published between 1925 to 1939, what can we conclude? In 1925, Doreal claims to have received a supernatural invitation to visit Tibet, where in a hidden underground kingdom of the Himalayas, he spent 8 years being taught by the ascended masters of the great adepts. In the same year, 1925, Doreal claims to have visited the Great Pyramids of Giza in order to retrieve the Emerald Tablets. In interviews with Time and Life magazines, Doreal was questioned about the lack of international passport stamps that could prove he had physically traveled outside of the U.S. As Doreal did not physically travel to Tibet, he responded by stating that he had traveled to the region by way of astral projection. Questions. At what point in 1925 did Doreal leave Tibet and travel to the Great Pyramids of Giza located in Cairo, Egypt, on the African continent? International travel between different countries and continents requires the presentation of a passport book which is stamped during a traveler's passage through a country's customs office. Where was the proof of a passport stamp for his travels to Cairo, Egypt, in Africa? Observations. Between 1925 to 1939, there are a total of 14 years between the time that Maurice Doreal claimed to have traveled to both Tibet and Egypt in 1925 and the year 1939 in which he published the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean. Note: 14 years is more than enough time to decipher, decode, interpret, and translate the Emerald Tablets, and then write, publish, and distribute a book about them. Between 1929 and 1939, 4 years later, after claiming to have traveled to both Tibet and Egypt in 1925, Maurice Doreal would begin writing and authoring books, booklets, and pamphlets in 1929. Over a 10-year period from this point in time, he would write, publish, and distribute an estimated total of 8 books related to the occult and esoteric studies, to include the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean, in 1939. Between 1929 to 1941, 4 years later, after claiming to have traveled to both Tibet and Egypt in 1925, Claude Dodgen, also known as Maurice Doreal, would be employed in multiple roles in the United States beginning in 1929. Over a 12-year period from this point in time, he worked as a clerk, a cab driver, a brokerage salesman, and a department store salesman during the era of the Great Depression in America. Note: it appears that while Dodgens was employed in different roles with different companies over the course of 12 years, he was also working on writing, publishing, and distributing an estimated total of 8 books during this time period. Between 1930 to 1933, 5 years later, after claiming to have traveled to both Tibet and Egypt in 1925, Claude Dodgen, also known as Maurice Doreal, established the Brotherhood of the White Temple in 1930 as per the directive that he claims was given to him by the ascended masters of the great adepts. 8 years later, after claiming to have traveled to both Tibet and Egypt in 1925, the Oklahoma City Directory listed Claude Dodgens, also known as Maurice Doreal's, occupation as President of the Brotherhood of the White Temple in 1933. Note: at this particular point within the specified period of 14 years, Dodgen was not only employed in multiple roles with different companies, he was also writing, publishing and distributing books, as well as forming the Brotherhood of the White Temple and becoming president of the organization. Between 1935 to 1939, 10 years later, after claiming to have traveled to both Tibet and Egypt in 1925, Claude Dodgen, also known as Maurice Doreal, was described as a traveling minister who'd been a transient across country with no place of residence in 1935. 12 years later, after claiming to have traveled to both Tibet and Egypt in 1925, Dodgen divorced his second wife in 1937, complaining that she had denounced him in front of his disciples. Questions. Why would Dodgen's wife denounce him? What was the subject of the denouncement? Let's take a brief look at 3 definitions for the word denounce. From the Oxford English Dictionary, denounce is defined as to publicly declare a person or thing to be wicked or evil, usually implying the expression of righteous indignation, to bring a public accusation, to publicly declare to be wrong or evil, to condemn, criticize, or castigate, to inform against, to expose, incriminate, or implicate. Observations. Based upon the 3 different definitions and meanings for the word denounce, it appears that Doreal's wife may have been aware of some falsehood that he was promoting for opportunistic gain. And finally, 14 years later, after claiming to have traveled to both Tibet and Egypt in 1925, Dodgen, writing under the pseudonym M. Doreal, would publish a book entitled The Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean, in 1939. Conclusion. Spanning a 14-year period between 1925 to 1939, which culminated in his most popular book entitled The Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean, Claude D. Dodgen, also known as Maurice Doreal or M. Doreal, was a very, very busy man. If you take into account all of the activities he is said to have engaged in or accomplished within a specified period of time in his life, and then combine these activities with the information and the evidence collected and gathered from our sources about how Maurice Doreal may have borrowed and copied from the works of other occultists and authors, one could only conclude what exactly? Maybe we should be looking at the obvious from another angle, a different dimension of perspective, perhaps. If you will recall from the source we cited at Wikipedia, their online entry titled Maurice Doreal states, in 1925, Doreal claimed to have visited the Great Pyramids of Giza, where he discovered a set of ancient emerald tablets belonging to the Egyptian deity Thoth, whom he reimagined as a king of Atlantis. Let's revisit the definition for reimagine. According to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, the word reimagine is defined as follows. Reimagine, to form a new conception of, to recreate, to imagine again, or imagine anew. For imagination's sake, let's take a look at Doreal's claims from his perspective. The truth is stranger than the science fiction it may be encoded within. If we were to take Doreal's claims at face value, in having channeled Thoth in his interpretation and translation of the Emerald Tablets, then we could imagine that this form of communication could have been accomplished through the electronic medium of the ether, so that the message of instruction would have traveled over the universal airwaves of telepathic communication, projecting over and across the expanse of time and space, so that in this instance, Thoth as communicator could be likened unto a master lectorius within the mental scriptorium of Doreal's mind. If you will recall the entry that we read from our source, History Stack Exchange, where they are cited as stating, the works have survived, however, because they were copied either by individual scholars or by being copied in mass in scriptoriums. In a scriptorium, a master reader, called a lectorius, would recite the word, and scribes would write it down as he spoke it. In other words, when Doreal claims to have channeled Thoth, one would have to imagine that he became a conduit, a vessel, an instrument, and a receiver of hyperdimensional communication that can be equated to the scribes and monks within the ancient scriptoriums who received readings of dictation from the master lectorius in their transcribing of ancient manuscripts and books. After all, we are told that we exist within an electric universe, and that the human body is bioelectric in nature. As the human body can be likened unto a tuning fork that can both receive and transmit thought forms by mentally broadcasting and projecting our thoughts into the thought space, we also possess the ability to attune ourselves to certain frequencies in order to tap into the universal consciousness and its collective pool of thought that we refer to as the Akashic Record. So there you have it. You be the judge. In so doing, take into consideration all of the information that has been presented within this work and form your own conclusions. And, on a final note, maybe the best way of hiding a great truth is to encode it within the literary science of fiction. The truth is out there. Anything is possible. This concludes Part 3, Subpart 2. Be sure to watch Part 4 of The Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean. Who is Maurice Doreal? The Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean. Who is Maurice Doreal? Part 4. Here in Section 4, we will conclude this series with our closing thoughts about the life of Claude Dodgens, also known as Maurice Doreal, and the impact that his work has had in the literary world of imagination and possibilities. In today's world, Claude D. Dodgens, also known as Maurice Doreal, would have been labeled an eccentric fringe thinker and conspiracy theorist. Doreal's interest in the occult, esoteric, and metaphysical sciences, combined with his penchant for sci-fi fantasy and pulp fiction, has resulted in a work that has captured the imaginations of many a reader. With his penchant for sensationalism and wild speculations about the existence of UFOs, the Gobi, and the evil and benign warring factions of underground serpent races, Maurice Doreal successfully captivated the hearts and the minds of those who relish in the fables and tall tales of a really good story. There's nothing like cuddling up with a really good read while lounging in a favorite chair, laying down on a cozy couch, or stretching out across a comfy bed and allowing the words on the pages to engage your imagination and spirit you away to another mind space. Most of us take things at face value. We believe what we see. We believe what we hear. We believe what we are told. Even when it's something simple like the subject matter contained within the pages of a book, there is the inherent unconscious act of extending the benefit of the doubt about what it is we are reading, most especially if the content within a book is being promoted as truth. As speculation surrounding the validity and authenticity of the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean, continues to be a source of controversy, I set out to find the truth by collecting and gathering information from several sources and compiling the investigative results that have their conclusion within this presentation. On a personal note, it has been interesting to learn about Maurice Doreal and the man behind having written one of the most popular books within occult circles. On an investigative note, it is felt that the results of our research, in combination with our hypothetical attempt to look at the interpretation and translation process from Doreal's perspective, provides readers with enough information to draw their own conclusions. In closing, and for now, the actual whereabouts of the Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean, if in fact they do exist, remain an unsolved mystery. Also in Section 4, we provide a bibliography and a partial listing of books by Claude D. Dodgens written under the pseudonym Maurice Doreal and or the pen name M. Doreal. The bibliography also contains a partial listing of booklets and pamphlets archived within the Little Temple Library located on the Temple of the Brotherhood website. At the end of the bibliography is a resource page, which lists various online sources and libraries that have books and materials related to metaphysic, occult, and esoteric studies. This concludes our 5-part series for The Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean, Who is Maurice Doreal?